Welcome to the Wolfe Power Club, the weekly podcast where we discuss energy, industry and politics. I'm your host Alex. I've sold and bought a few companies and also I've sold billions of litres. Join me on this journey to net zero. Download on Apple Podcasts. Season 1 brought to you by AIM Recruit, the leading recruiters in logistics, transport and energy at www.aimrecruit.com. Guys, welcome to the Wolfe Power Club budget special. You join me in an unbelievable venue. You join me in the Great Hall. It's probably had so much of British history in here, from our late beloved Queen's final journey here, through to the likes of Nelson Mandela doing an incredible speech in here. But today, the 6th of November, we've got the Wolfe Power Club budget special. The first budget of the new government has come out, and we're going to explore all the issues that affect the energy sector. North Sea oil tax, through to minimum wage in our retail sector and the living wage, through to essentially the taxes that will help our economy grow, through to their plans for renewables. We're unbelievable to be in Westminster today. We're going to have some fantastic guests from around the energy industry on our Wolfe Power Club special. I can't wait to discuss more over the next half an hour of our podcast. Thank you.
A big budget, far bigger than expected.
This budget raises taxes by £40 billion.
We are not going back to austerity. Again, that was a promise that we have delivered as a Labour government.
People, I think, get ignored.
There will be no higher taxes at the petrol pumps next year.
I think the challenges remain. There's an awful lot to do to be net zero by 2030.
Well, look, the money's got to come from somewhere. They've changed the borrowing rules.
Labour promised a warm homes plan. I personally think that's probably an area that you might want to tackle.
For those of us who crave a bit of long-term certainty, we're going to have to wait a bit longer.
Big tax, big borrowing, big spending. Welcome to the Wolfe Power Club special on the budget. What we're going to do today is scene set. What did we come into? So essentially, at the general election, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, was very clear in the lead up to the general election. She was clear about not raising taxes, about the British economy having faith in her. Today on the Wolfe Power Club, we're going to look to see her first budget, reviewing a few days after it's happened with some of the leading experts in the industry. But let's go back to the scene setting and look at what she said. And I'm going to use for this the Institute of England and Wales's account of the week for the 11th of October. This is a fantastic piece of material. So it talks about the top 5 taxes that she actually said in the general election leading up to it were fixed. So she talked about employees' national insurance fixed at 56 billion. Corporation tax was fixed, and that was 110 billion to the Treasury last year. She talked about employer national insurance, 113 billion. She talked about VAT not being moved, fixed at 203 billion. Talked about income tax being fixed at 303 billion. And then these top 5 taxes together have led to 776 billion out of the 1.139 trillion of the previous government's budget being fixed. So it looked like she had very little wriggle room to move with. Now, a few days after the budget, we can look to see where she focused on, and she did the second highest tax raise in a single budget in history. She's defended it by apologising, saying that she didn't try to mislead people, but it has come across that it's maybe an election stance. And we're going to concentrate on the energy industry today. So the other parts to remember is 743,000 jobs in the energy industry. That's nearly 1 in 48 jobs in the UK. And so essentially, the big controversial point is it looks like the new government has kind of set up a couple of different camps, both within society and the economy. First, there's this idea about protecting working people. And if you owned your own company or had shares in your own company, you're not part of the working people. This created a lot of passion leading to the debate. Another group we won't focus on today, but essentially the farming community, with the tax changes there on inheritance tax, looked like the idea of the family farm has certainly been impacted in the budget. And the final part is this idea of splitting the energy industry. Huge support for renewable energy. So there was announcements about 22 billion that already come out this summer for carbon and looking at how we do carbon storage. There was also the reconfirmation of GB Energy and the north of 8 billion that's going into there. And then also various other different incentives on the renewables that we'll go into with our speakers. But on the other side of the energy debate, the side that actually provides 71% of all of our energy in the UK, oil and gas, there seemed to be a huge impact. Now, there was a big build up to this. At the end of September, the OE UK had a big conference where you had, board level members from BP stressing the importance that the government needs to support the industry. You had the OE UK's leadership team talking about not only the role of protecting the 200,000 jobs, but energy security. And on top of energy security, energy transition. So as many of the goals that the government want were going to come from the oil and gas sector by supporting it, but rather than not taking it on. Instead, what we have seen is the following budget, and I think it's quite rightly described by Laura Koonsberg on the BBC as big tax, big borrowing, big spending. And one of the areas to have some of the biggest tax is the community of Aberdeen. As I record this reflection, although many of the interviews for this special are done in Westminster, this has actually been done in Aberdeen as we reflect on the budget. And essentially what happened was the one kind of saving grace was they got to retain 100% capital allowances on the first year of projects. So that provided some relief. And also it looked like on some companies that share price very directly affected by the oil and gas fields, some slight relief and slight bounce the day after the news, because I think they thought that was going to go as well. But the energy profits levy, or as the public call it, the windfall tax, has had a further 3% on it. So it's going from 75% to 78%. This is almost over 3 times higher than other corporate taxes in the UK, which the rest of corporate tax at 25%. So you can see what a massive amount that is. I think we're going to do a whole episode on the levy because it's just such a issue, because when it was set, it was kind of in a period that was north of $130 post UK and Russia inflation. We're now nowhere near those levels, back down to $70 when we're looking at the price. The other thing is though that the levy investment allowances have gone, and essentially it's been described as a super tax. The Aberdeen and leader of the Chamber of Commerce, Russell Borthwick, has talked about this really potentially hitting jobs in Aberdeen. And it'll be interesting, as we see over the next coming weeks, what the impact is, but also that we know various energy companies are looking to put fields up for sales. And there was various announcements in the summer that if the budget was not favourable, companies would be relocating to Norway and other economic zones of the North Sea oil. We have to watch this space, but it's fair to say that the North Sea oil has been really, really hit. The oil and gas industry, and of that 743,000 jobs in energy, probably 200,000 relate to North Sea oil and gas, and particularly a city like Aberdeen. We then are going to go and look at 3 different areas today. We've got the RAC Foundation looking at the protection of the road system and what it means for the motorists. We have got from the Aldersgate Group, we've got Rachel Solomon-Williams, one of the leading people that's both worked in the civil service and private sector, looking about what opportunities the budget's going to provide. And we've got Dr. Jan Rosenow, who's one of the leading speakers on energy, is passionate about the insulation of houses, and he'll go into it. Enjoy this budget special, and I look forward to the focus on energy and the follow-up we're going to do to it. As I say, there's been clear winners and losers in the energy sector, and I look forward to your comments and feedback. The other thing I'd just like to say, and it's really good if you can follow the podcast and subscribe, is that we've got a US presidential special coming up next week on the 13th of November, when we'll know who has won that battle to be the next president of the United States of America. Enjoy the UK budget special. As I say, we will be following up more of these issues over the coming months. And of course, enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wolfe Power Club. We have just seen the first budget of the new government, and it has really been focused on energy. Today, as part of our budget special, we have one of the leading organisations in Britain that really represents the area that always energy looks at either benefiting or changing, is the RAC Foundation. Concentrate on us, the motorists, the consumer, but also bring in the industry and about their thoughts and needs. I'm delighted to invite their Director of Policy, Steve, to the podcast. Welcome, Steve. How's your day been?
Well, it's a quieter day today than yesterday was with the budget itself, so it's fine. Thank you.
So, without further ado, Steve, it was the first budget, and what were your thoughts of Rachel Reeves setting out the next 5 years of what the Labour government would like to do?
Well, probably to pick up your question there, the first thing I would say is, in some elements, the Chancellor set out the next 5 years, and in some, all she was really doing was paving the way to the spending review, which will be conducted between now and, I think, next summer, which will be the longer-term look. So I think that there were a number of interesting points. We'll no doubt come onto them in the budget, but for sectors like automotive, sectors like highway stewardship, that have been crying out for long-term certainty, they're going to have to wait a bit longer.
We are looking at all of the things that a new British government should do. I think what is fascinating is that energy has probably been the main part of their new policies that they've set out since coming in the summer, and also quite a rarity in that the Secretary of State in Ed Miliband has actually been on and off doing this role for probably the best part of a couple of decades, and that's probably for me the longest serving politician I've seen in this role in various different forms. So I guess from the budget, what do you feel that the government should be trying to execute? Because essentially they have a majority that means that they will be in, till 2029, bar some, events, and we've always had a few big events in British politics in the last 10 years, but bar that, what do you think a government should be trying to do in a 5-year period with their budget, with levers of fiscal policy and also levers of encouragement of industry and expertise?
So the government has already done a lot on electricity, right? Since they came into power in July, they have done an awful lot of things. They've committed to 2030 clean power. They have managed NESO, the National Energy System Operator, to start just a few weeks ago. They've made Chris Stark the leader of Mission Control, which is going to deliver this target. So they've done a lot on electricity already, and there's more to come. But I think what's missing, in my view, and I think the view of many others, and I think that's also important for the electorate, is something that's much closer to home. I mean, Labour promised a warm homes plan. I think that was the name in the manifesto, right? And I think that is an area where, if you think about any potential new public spending, I personally think that's probably an area that you might want to tackle first, because it's affecting people, and we go into the winter with prices rising, right? The latest price cap increase that we've seen from Ofgem points into one direction, which is not helpful when it comes to the next winter. And Labour could really, I think, support people more with improving the efficiency of their homes, right? Switching to more efficient technologies like heat pumps or installing solar on their rooftops. I think that is one of the areas that has been overlooked in the past, and is one where Labour, and with their budget, I think could make a real contribution, especially for low-income families, who just don't have the capital, can't afford it. I think that's one of the areas I would really like to see Labour making a bit of a splash with the budget, be a bit more ambitious and bolder than perhaps the last government. That's the one I would point out. I mean, there's so many other areas that we could go into here, but I think you just want something short, right, that you could put into your compilation of statements. But this is the one I would say, really, we need some action on warm homes, because It's important for the climate. I think it's also important for energy security in the UK. And it's very close to home for the electorate. People need to see some real changes, I think, in their own lives, positive changes when it comes to energy. If prices just keep going up, I don't think we can keep the public actually committed to this project of net zero. So I see some real risks there. We government should make sure that especially the poorest in society are protected from those price rises.
Yeah, I think on that point, it's one of the most stark things that I really hope. I remember there was about last year, it snowed in London, and I was actually in Westminster for a Bees committee meeting. And what made me laugh was that day I decided, because I love it when the snow comes out in London and you're thinking, where are you going with this, Alex? But you'll see in a second. I like going from Waterloo to walk across the bridge to Westminster, just, I enjoy that. And what blew my mind was I've never visually seen such a good demonstration of an insulated building versus a not insulated building. So all the modern skyscrapers in London are normally actually built pretty well to actually have very, very low energy costs and very low GI. The snow had settled on all the skyscrapers. The one building that did not have a single drop of snow was our beloved Houses of Parliament, because it's your classic, looks beautiful, was built hundreds of years ago. You obviously repair it in the form that it was built in its era. And it was just the most stark image you could give to people of an insulated building versus not. And I do worry that we're not actually getting people on board by, looking at their housing projects. And you said, what you can't control necessarily is the energy market. What you can control is how much energy people use.
With your energy and climate hat on, how do you feel the budget has gone today for the various stakeholders that you work with? And I think it's fair to say it's probably been the most detailed budget on energy for some time.
Absolutely agree. So Aldersgate Group members include businesses from across the economy, not just energy sector, but they all have an interest in the story on energy and the story on wider environment and nature. We also have NGOs and academic institutions in membership, but all thinking from the business point of view. I was really impressed with the budget today in terms of consistency and sticking with the message that the new government's been putting out on energy. The capital budget for DESNZ has increased significantly, and they're really focusing on where they can have impact. So green hydrogen, making sure it's really that most environmentally friendly version of hydrogen, ensuring that carbon capture will be focused on industrial decarbonisation, which we agree is where it needs to be focused. So heavy industry, we don't want that going offshore, we want to keep it in the UK. Let's make sure we offer it the tools to decarbonise right here. And then we were most pleased to see, I think, the Warm Homes Plan funding. It's not at the level that was announced in the manifesto, but I've just spoken to the minister about it, and she said, look, it'll be coming. This is just the short-term settlement. We expect it to build over time so that also the market can catch up, because we can't suddenly retrofit insulation and heat pumps all over houses everywhere. We need to get it going gradually.
Let's say, for instance, there was some sort of incentive. What do you think would be like almost for the most homes, the sort of, the big items that could really move them to being much more energy efficient in that, say, 5-year period?
I mean, the best package where you see your running costs really plummet would consist of, if you have an old building that's poorly insulated, upgrade the insulation. Not necessarily insulate all of the walls to the thickest possible levels, but if you have single glazing and no loft insulation, that's a no-brainer pretty much, or no underfloor insulation. And then coupled with a much more efficient heating system, and heat pumps are just delivering heat at a much higher efficiency to a gas boiler, about 4 times more efficient, and then solar panels on the roof if possible. So that package will drop your bills quite a bit for heating. And it's a long-term insurance policy, right? It's a bit like you have to invest up front, right? It's expensive. There's no, don't want to avoid that point. It's expensive up front, but once you've done that, you have savings, until the end of the lifetime of the equipment, which could well be 20 years plus. So it's really an insurance policy, and I think that is something I would want Labour to focus on more. How can we actually find the best solutions? There's a great example. Just this morning I saw that in the US, with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's been a competition that DOE, the Department of Energy, ran, and they invited manufacturers of heat pumps to compete for who can make the heat pump that runs most efficiently at really low temperatures, down to minus 26 degrees centigrade. They operate and still deliver at high efficiency levels. So they've just completed that first round of competition for residential buildings. And now I think 8 companies will take their products to market that succeeded in that competition. And now they move on to the commercial sector, where they're going to push ahead with innovation as well. And I quite like these kinds of policies because they essentially invite people to compete. They invite innovation. Yes, there's some funding, right? There's something that is of interest to the companies that take part in it. There's an incentive, a sweetener. But it's not a process where the government decides, oh, this exactly is the technology we want. No, we actually invite people to compete and come up with the best solution. So that's something again that we could be doing in the UK. What is the best solution to actually bring down bills and run a bit of a competition for it? I would love to see that.
Fantastic. It's interesting. One of our other speakers on this podcast on Budget Special, Dr. Jan Rosenow, is saying that the one thing he implores governments across the world to do, but especially the UK one, is look at insulation of housing as one of the quickest ways and most effective ways to get to net zero long-term goals. Why is that? Like, what will this funding do for British households that we haven't been able to do in the past?
There's been a real fluctuation in funding for home energy installation and for heat pump installation over the last 20 years. So we've had, going back quite a long time, there was the ECO scheme where it was basically handing out money through energy companies for this kind of installation. And then that dropped off when there was the aim to bring in the Green Deal quite a long time ago now. But the Green Deal basically didn't really work. And they never got back to that level of funding. And it's the consistency that's so important, because the funding gives a signal to the market, which enables installers and the whole industry to come together to offer a package to consumers. Consumers are now thoroughly confused about what they can do in their house, who they need to ask about it, where are the trusted stakeholders, where are the trusted industry players. And this funding, they haven't yet published the whole Warm Homes Plan. So the Warm Homes Plan is what will explain exactly how it's going to be spent. And we're looking forward to seeing that kind of unpacked in more detail. We hope it will include, and we've also been campaigning for, or we don't do campaigning, but arguing for a much more kind of high level approach to communicating with the public. So some sort of platform, a bit like the NHS website, where you can go and it's government central information. What do I need to do with my home? Click down. How do I do it? Who do I call next? Do I, be sure you can trust this information. And then there is funding available to help you actually execute those plans. So help those householders who are not sure. And why is this important? The basic levels of insulation pay for themselves very quickly. It's an absolute no-brainer in terms of cost per tonne of carbon saved. It gets more complicated when you get to solid wall insulation and some of those more difficult measures. But actually the dialogue around that is changing as well now. So I expect that Jan will have said this as well. It's getting to the point where actually it makes sense to install a heat pump before you've done absolutely every bit of retrofitting in your house, in many cases, because the payback for a heat pump is becoming more reasonable, and because electricity is decarbonising. So if we've got really low carbon electricity in the system, you might as well shift your heating system away from a gas boiler.
Yeah, and I think for all of our listeners, even if you're not the lead engineer of an energy company, you can all do a very simple experiment, I say, with with yourself in the kitchen after this. Brew yourself a cup of coffee, put it in a mug, and it'll probably go cold after 15 minutes. Put it in a top flask, probably 4 hours later, you can still have it piping hot, and basically the same science works for the house across millions of people. But coming back to the budget, there also has been a lot about GB energy and about carbon capture. We've now seen a few more details. What do you feel about the announcements today in relationship to that? And it's sort of confirming a process that's been going on since the summer.
Yeah, on carbon capture, the certainty is helpful. So it's been quite a drawn out process of selecting projects and gradually working through to certainty for those projects. It's that clarity that we welcome. So and making sure that trajectory carries on into delivery now, because we've been talking about carbon capture and storage for so long in this industry. And, there was some really cataclysmic pulling of funding. Now it was probably 10, 15 years ago. That needs to not happen again. So set the trajectory and really go for it. And the details will have to be worked through, but that's really welcome. GB Energy, it's helpful that they're giving more detail. Obviously, there's going to have to be a process of setting it up. We now know who the director of that will be, and we know who the chair is. All these public sector organisations take time to get established, and I hope that doesn't cause too much kind of friction and delay. We think there's an awful lot that can be done around GB Energy anyway. So a lot of our energy infrastructure is being delivered by the private sector. That will continue to be true. If there are the right signals through the allocation rounds for the contracts for difference in the wind sector, that will all come through. And I know that the work that Chris Stark is doing in his Mission Control, I think it's called. Is that what it's called? Anyway, he's running the Clean Power Mission for 2030. And what they're doing is looking project by project, because actually what he said is we now know every single project that will need to be deployed to hit that 2030 clean power target. We know where they all are, and we know what the problems are that get in the way of their deployment. So they can work on thinking about, for example, the planning system, where we've been doing a lot of work here at Aldersgate Group as well. How do we make sure that the planning system really acts as an enabler, not just a barrier to getting all those projects through? Now, I think GB Energy is a kind of an added bonus around that. And if it can focus very much on the communities aspect as well, and the bits of the market that the existing private sector isn't quite getting to yet, that would be excellent to see.
So let's just start with the motorists. Did you think it was inevitable that she was going to keep fuel duty the same? Because in that sort of 2 months leading up to the budget, I know that there was various organisations that indicated there might be a 7p rise on road fuel duty or tax at the pump. So were you happy that she kept the duty the same for motorists, or do you think that challenges in raising then therefore funds for areas you just talked about?
I think there are two things to say about the decision on fuel duty. One, I'll just share an anecdote. It was literally on the morning of the budget, I had somebody saying to me that removing the 5p discount and probably putting up the duty rate was an absolute certainty, inevitable, couldn't be avoided. And I had to explain that in the real world, the Chancellor can decide things right up to the last moment, and the factors that the Chancellor is having to weigh in thinking about fuel duty go way beyond the impact on motoring, on the individual motorist pocket. The second thing I would say is, I'm not sure whether I'd say happy or sad. I mean, I think none of us particularly likes having to pay tax or duties, but it was surprising, I guess, that having been told repeatedly these are very tough environment the Chancellor has inherited. These are very tough times ahead. Some very hard decisions are going to have to be made. Arguably, the best time to take those very hard decisions is right after getting elected with a sizable majority, because the world only gets harder from there on in. And therefore, some of us might have thought, now, if you're really looking to raise some money, this is when you would do it. and clearly not the case. And I think that there are some very good, sound economic thinking here, because after all, we're thinking about the impact not only on families, but we're thinking about the impact on business. And when I say business, it's not just business travel, it's logistics, it's commercial travel, it's how we get stuff into supermarkets and delivered to our homes. There's a ripple through the economy when you put up the cost of travel, which is sometimes missed by those who are commenting on this. So an understandable decision. I think that something that was entirely not mentioned is, okay, that's this year. Looking a bit further ahead, we know that fuel duty income is going to go down. What are you going to do about that? Again, for those of us who crave a bit of long-term certainty, we're going to have to wait a bit longer.
Fantastic. And I think my last sort of area of discussion on the budget today is, I think that although there was a sigh of relief of every motorist and transport company that fuel duty was held again, I think probably the one feedback that there's going to be a huge amount is that it feels like a huge amount of the tax increase is being paid for by all sorts of businesses. And I think especially within the energy sector, it's been a difficult day for the guys up in Aberdeen and the 200,000 workers up there, with various changes from the various tax rates to also what can be offsetting capital allowances, although they have been given a grace period of the first year. Do you think it's fair that business is one of the main contributors because of the importance of where we need to get to on the green agenda, or do you feel that this is a sort of short-term pain for long-term gain?
Well, the money's got to come from somewhere. They've changed the borrowing rules to release quite a lot of capital and investment space to start with. And in order to do more, there had to be a tax rise somewhere. And the government were very keen to stick to the manifesto commitments they've made around tax, which left very little wriggle room. I mean, at Aldersgate Group, even in the Secretariat, I think we'll be paying a bit more national insurance, employer contribution than we were before. And so everybody's going to feel it in most sizes of organisation. They have been careful on that one to try and protect the smallest businesses, which is welcome to see, because those are the businesses we really need to look after. On oil and gas, I think the crucial thing is about industrial strategy and transition. So I'm not going to comment on the rate of tax that's been applied this time. It's consistent with the government's overall narrative. They are being very clear that they think the future of energy is renewable and nuclear and the whole clean power sector. And so the approach they're taking to oil and gas is consistent with that. But it's absolutely vital that they've got a clear vision for what's going to happen to that sector and the workers in it. How do we make sure that we protect those people and those communities and help them to find new jobs over time as the existing jobs come to an end?
Yeah, and I think certainly, there is roles in GB Energy that have been earmarked for a head office in Aberdeen. So it seems like the government really is looking at transition from it. And it'll be interesting times, and obviously on the podcast we will have a reply from the North Sea community. But no, I appreciate what you're saying, and I think it does look like, whatever people's opinion on the budget, the government's been very clear about investing and clear investment strategy. And I got to say, in terms of levers they can or can't pull, will show up in the podcast also a wonderful chart by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, and it looks at what was promised in the general election and what that left to be moved or not moved, and the levers. And I got to say, Chart of the Week, a big shout out to their website for anyone who's never seen it. Go to Chart of the Week on the Institute Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. And for anyone that loves data, and obviously my day job now is managing the data with big energy companies, we love that chart, so big shout out to those guys. Yeah, I think it's such a good point you just made there, Steve, about the knock-on effect of fuel duty. For those podcasts who don't know, I used to run a fleet of 900 trucks in previous roles. And essentially what you have to do is, if duty goes up, it's a cost base going up, it gets passed on to the end customer. And you should have said, whether it's deliveries into supermarkets or deliveries to other parts of the life, it then start coming about the increasing cost base. And it's kind of a society cost, not just a fuel-related cost.
that happens. And was there any bits that the RAC Foundation thought were quite a difference to the previous government? Because obviously they've talked about this budget in other media, that this is the second highest amount of tax raised in a single budget. I think they've talked about a figure that, if the forecasts are right, nearly 40 billion raised. But is there parts that you saw a big difference from this government to the past government in relationship to the areas that the RAC Foundation specialises in?
Well, I think not really. To be perfectly honest, I think that there were some changes. There were some changes of tone, of nuance, but the really big spending pressures that government faces in areas like actual health, in social care, in pensions, in all of those sorts of areas, I think that's where the Chancellor has always got to find a way of covering those things first. I think we already had a government previously, up to the election, that was pursuing a path towards electric motoring, towards putting some incentives and some carrots and sticks, we can come back to that, into the system to try and get us out of fossil fuel vehicles and into alternative fuel vehicles, into battery electric cars and the like. So I think I would say, in many ways, surprisingly familiar territory. I don't think it would have surprised us hugely if we'd woken up and found that this was the previous Chancellor, specifically when it comes to the measures relating to our interests of motoring and road use.
And going into your interests of motoring and road use, I'm very interested, what would a sort of great budget look like for the RAC Foundation? And I was just wondering if you could comment. It was in the small text yesterday, it wasn't part of the big headlines, but I see one of the capital projects that's been dropped is the further extension of bypasses between the northeast and Edinburgh. So once again, we're kind of left without the sort of two major capitals of the United Kingdom, or two of the several capitals of the United Kingdom, London, Scotland, still not having that bypass expansion to Edinburgh. But what would a perfect budget look like for you guys from an RAC Foundation perspective, and that issue that kind of sneaked out yesterday, and only really friends for the North East and Scotland contacted me on it, and it wasn't on many major media channels?
Well, there are, as is always the way, quite a few things that sneak past us in the budget documents that somehow or other the Chancellor never finds quite enough room in their speech to Parliament to shoehorn everything in that we might actually find really quite interesting. And I suspect many people would be well advised to have a look at what the budget documentation has to say about the showroom tax, the year one vehicle excise duty on new cars, where the decision has been taken to double the rate of year one vehicle excise duty on non-battery electric cars, which could be quite significant, and also signals this government's continuation of the previous government's, I would say, intense scepticism about the value of hybrid cars. So it's, if you're driving something that has a fossil fuel motor in it somewhere, you're going to be paying a price for that. So I think there are plenty of things in there. What would a perfect budget look like? Almost impossible to devise a perfect budget in the real world, let's be clear about that. But the things that worry us, the things that worry motorists, the things that worry people doing the job that you used to do with a fleet of lorries, the condition of the most valuable asset the public of this country own, which is the road network. We know the condition of the network isn't good. The Chancellor announced some extra money. Again, there's having a close look at what the extra money actually amounts to in real terms over the next year or so. But it was extra money over the next year or so. What we would like to see, and what everyone would like to see, is the ability for local highway authorities and for highways, national highways, the National Highway Authority, to be able to plan ahead the maintenance and renewal of this enormously valuable asset, and to start building in, even more than they have, and to a far greater extent than they have, resilience into that network to dealing with the impact of climate change and extreme, as we used to think of it, extreme weather, but very, very heavy rainfall, which is affecting the road condition. So number one would be a good, sizable, long-term settlement for the capital side of renewal and maintenance of the road network. An ideal for us would be a recognition that alongside that capital budget, there is a resource budget needed if we're going to keep our roads in good order and keep the traffic managed. It's current expenditure that keeps traffic control centres running. It's current expenditure that keeps the traffic signals running. So we need some money for that too. And I think rather than make a case for special pleading on what the rates of taxation or duty rates on fuel or cars should be, again, a third plea for some certainty of where are we heading, what's the direction of travel, what's the position going to be 3, 5, 7 years' time, so that people are making decisions about what's for every household, really quite sizable investment decision if they're buying a vehicle, even if they're leasing a vehicle, that they have a good sense of what that's going to cost them, and that all of those come together. Coming back to your focus on energy, I think there are some issues that are well understood about the relative cost of recharging an electric car at a public rapid charge point as opposed to being able to plug it in at home. This budget didn't do anything about that, and I think that's going to become really something of a sore point some further way down the track as electric cars make their way into the used market. People who don't have off-street parking, some of whom are extremely wealthy and some of whom are very much not, and both of whom are likely to feel rather hard done by. I've noticed very wealthy people have a very laser-like focus on the cost of things, which is why they get to be very wealthy. Why are they paying 60, 70, 80, 90 pence per kilowatt hour for electricity at a public charge point for something that would cost them less than 10 pence if they were able to plug in at home? That's going to be a big issue in the world of electric motoring, and that's something that I think the Chancellor, again, needs to build into her thinking for that spending review.
I think it's such a valid point, Steve, because I think that I'm someone who lives in zone 3 in London, and as you say, the actual house price is high, but very very few people have driveways. It's your classic terrace housing in London and parking on the street. I think it was fine having charge points on lampposts when there was free Teslas in the street, but now, as you say, a big chunk is going towards electric. It doesn't really suffice, and as you say, I recently signed a business up to a 12-month deal on its electricity at a hybrid cost of 12 pence per kilowatt hour. And as you said, there are various retail outlets that are charging those higher, north of 70p, north of 80p's. And the reality is if you were to own an electric car in the centre of London or zone 3, it's not even central for some people consider, is that you're more likely to be charging at those places, and at those prices suddenly you're at the same break-even point as petrol, diesel in terms of total spend for say 500 miles. I'm now going to go and just ask my final question on the budget, Steve, is that a country I love and has some of the most extreme weather on earth but has excellent road quality is Austria. So they have unbelievable snowfall, then they have unbelievable melting, and they have fantastic road quality. What I've always struggled with, and I understand that obviously in the United Kingdom we've had a very wet year, for example, that's inevitably going to cause wear and tear on roads. But I think the dreaded issue of potholes, I think we've seen the worst case of examples of it actually leading to crashes that have had serious impact of those people involved, even some fatalities, some cases have argued. Where can we build the perfect roads? Because it seems an ongoing problem in Britain that road quality, whether it then adds massive hours onto journeys, whether it creates punctures with people, or whether it just doesn't keep an asset in a good place, seems to be a constant. What would the RAC Foundation's sort of proposal be that essentially we really stay on top of road quality? And I always get the impression in Britain we sometimes do cheap replacements that don't really solve the problem. It's like an interim measure, and that essentially we're not getting the quality of road that some other countries have.
There's a whole bundle of things there, and I won't try to work through absolutely all of them, but let's start with the fact that in an ideal world, well, we don't live in an ideal world, but we did. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have been the first Western European country into the Industrial Revolution, from which a whole bunch of things flow, including the fact that we have a very extensive road network, much of which was built over 100 years ago, sometimes far older than that. And in the last century, in the early part of the last century, as we were getting the hang of having motor cars and all those sorts of exciting new things, we got up there and started surfacing that network. And let's just face it, sometimes that was done on the cheap, and it's been done on the cheap ever since. How do you fix that? Well, the chances are in the real world, you're not going to fix that. Not everywhere, not every road, all of the time. I'm by no means an expert on what the roads are like away from the main distributors of Austria. I suspect even in Austria, you're going to come across some streets that are more to cobblestones and horse-drawn traffic than they do to the sort of thing we might like in the modern world. I think something else, and you might think this is odd, but I'll just sound a note of caution here. There are some parts, some countries we know of on mainland Europe where there are some people come home from their holidays saying the roads were fantastic, lovely, beautiful, smooth road, it was fantastic, why can't we have that here? And I say, just point out the country you've just come back from has a 26% youth unemployment rate and an economy that's tanking. Now, it is very important for our economy that we have the road network that we need. It is a task in hand for us, and I think for the highway sector, to identify rather better what that network is and what performance we require from it. Clearly, what we don't need is potholes all over the place, and we certainly don't need potholes that are causing vehicles to swerve or damage to vehicles. To some extent, that requires a rethink of getting away from patch and mend to fixing the network. I don't know whether Austria suffers to the same extent that we do from the fact that many of our roads are conduits for water, sewers, gas pipes, electricity, all of which have to be dug up from time to time, and when they're dug up, the road is never quite the same again. So I'm trying to find an alternative phrase here and completely failing to horses for courses. But I think that it is a pity, but understandable, that we've got a 1-year settlement ahead, an extension of the previous 5-year deal for national highways in England, for the biggest, the most important roads, the motorway network and the most important day roads. We need to get them onto a 5-year cycle again. Hopefully that will happen out of the spending review, because those roads carry the heaviest traffic, literally the heaviest flows, but also the heavier vehicles. Vitally important for them that the road is up to the task. And then we need to think beyond that network. What are the key trade routes? What are the ones that fuel the economy? What are the ones that really have to cope with those heavy vehicles? And then what do we need elsewhere, which may be different? And I would then sort of say we also need to be thinking not that the roads don't need to be of decent quality with a decent surface, but if you're running over them at a different speed, and if what you're doing predominantly even in Zone 3 in London, I think if I asked the Mayor for London, he'd be saying, I'm worried about the carriageway in Zone 3 for people who are cycling, for people who are travelling by bus. That's my priorities. Well, but for both of those, you need a decent carriageway. And maybe you don't need that carriageway to be capable of carrying vehicles travelling at 70 miles an hour, but you certainly need them to be travelling safely at 20 miles an hour.
No, I think it's a great point, and I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time with former cycling star, former gold medalist Chris Boardman, and he's very clear on that. A road needs to be safe enough for a 12-year-old to use it, and that means that exactly those points you said about high quality, and obviously, like famously, people talk about the Netherlands, but a lot of people forget that the Netherlands didn't have that in the 1960s. It's something that started in the 1970s and has progressed as part of their culture thing. Steve, thank you very much for your budget thoughts. And it's a great insight, but it looks like we need to get you back on the podcast when the spending review is complete, because it sounds like that this is almost the 1-year fix and we need to find out about the rest of the plans to 2029.
Absolutely. Look forward to that.